The security guards thought they had caught an easy target when they cornered the petite blonde translator in the equipment room. But when they forced Clara Kowalski to remove her uniform shirt for their so-called contraband inspection, the last thing they expected to see was the elite Delta Force trident tattooed across her shoulder blade. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow, I've saved something extra special for you. A mark that only the military's most lethal operators ever earned the right to wear. The morning sun cast long shadows across Forward Operating Base Serpent as the daily briefing began at 0630 hours. Located in the dusty hills of eastern Romania, the base served as a critical NATO training facility where American, British, and Romanian forces conducted joint operations. The air hummed with the familiar sounds of military efficiency. Helicopter rotors spinning up for morning patrols, diesel generators powering communication arrays, and the steady rhythm of boots on concrete as personnel moved between buildings. Inside the main briefing hall, rows of camouflaged soldiers sat at attention while Colonel Marcus Webb outlined the day's training exercises. The Americans occupied the front rows, their digital camouflage crisp and regulation perfect. Behind them sat the British contingent, their multicam uniforms bearing the subtle differences that marked them as foreign allies. The Romanian soldiers filled the remaining seats, some still adjusting to the NATO protocols that governed joint operations dotted a small desk near the back of the room. Clara Kowalski worked quietly with her translation equipment, her fingers dancing across a specialized keyboard as she provided real-time interpretation between English and Romanian. At 26, she was one of the youngest contracted linguists. On the base, her petite frame and shoulder-length blonde hair making her appear even younger than her years. She wore the standard contractor uniform, desert tan cargo pants and a matching button-down shirt with translator patches on both shoulders. The base operated on a strict hierarchy that everyone understood. Colonel Webb commanded the American contingent, Major Harrison led the British forces, and Colonel Popescu oversaw the Romanian troops. Below them, the chain of command flowed through various ranks and specialties, each with clearly defined roles and responsibilities. Combat troops held the highest status, followed by support personnel, technical specialists, and finally civilian contractors. Clara had learned her place in this hierarchy within days of arriving 6 months ago. She was efficient, reliable, and nearly invisible, exactly what the military preferred in their civilian support staff. Her job was to facilitate communication during briefings, translate field manuals, and occasionally serve as an interpreter during meetings with local officials. She performed these duties with quiet competence while the real soldiers focused on the important work of training and operations. The morning briefing covered standard topics, weather conditions, security protocols, and the day's training schedule. Clara translated seamlessly as Colonel Popescu outlined his unit's participation in an urban warfare exercise. Her Romanian was flawless, her English accent carrying just a hint of Eastern European inflection that marked her as a native speaker who had spent considerable time in Western countries. As the briefing concluded and personnel began filing out, Clara packed her equipment with practiced efficiency. She had 3 more translation sessions scheduled before lunch, then an afternoon of document work in her small office near the communication center. It was routine, predictable work that kept her busy and largely unnoticed. The base's social dynamics were equally predictable. The American soldiers formed tight-knit groups based on their units and specialties. The British maintained their traditional reserve while still integrating effectively with their NATO allies. The Romanian forces, proud of their growing partnership with Western militaries, worked hard to prove themselves worthy of the association. Clara existed on the periphery of all these groups. She was professional and pleasant in her interactions, but she never socialized beyond what her job required. During meals, she sat alone or with other contractors, reviewing documents or preparing for upcoming assignments. She declined invitations to the occasional social gatherings that brought together off-duty personnel. This isolation wasn't unusual for civilian contractors. Most were older, former military personnel who understood their place in the base hierarchy. They performed their specialized roles, maintenance, logistics, technical support, without challenging the established order. Clara fit this pattern perfectly, except for her age and the quiet intensity that occasionally flickered behind her pale blue eyes. The base command considered her an ideal contractor, skilled, dependable, and appropriately deferential to military authority. Her performance reviews consistently rated her as exemplary in all categories. She arrived early, stayed late when needed, and never complained about the demanding schedule or Spartan living conditions. What none of them knew was that Clara's apparent contentment with her limited role masked a constant state of assessment and preparation that had nothing to do with translation work. Clara's day began each morning at 0500 hours, 2 hours before the official base reveille. While other contractors slept in the relative comfort of their air-conditioned quarters, she quietly slipped out for what appeared to be a morning jog around the base perimeter. The guards at the main gate had grown accustomed to seeing the small blonde woman in her civilian running gear, earbuds in place, maintaining a steady pace along the dusty roads that connected the various compound sections. What they couldn't see was that Clara's route had been carefully planned to observe every security checkpoint, guard rotation, and potential vulnerability in the base's defensive posture. Her seemingly casual morning exercise was actually a detailed reconnaissance mission that she conducted with the systematic thoroughness of a professional intelligence operative. After her run, Clara returned to her quarters for a quick shower and change into her contractor uniform. Her living space was spartanly furnished with military-issue furniture, a narrow bed, metal desk, small wardrobe, and basic bathroom facilities. To any casual observer, it looked like the quarters of a career contractor who traveled light and lived simply. But Clara's belongings told a different story to those who knew how to read the signs. Her running shoes showed wear patterns, consistent with someone who regularly covered far more distance than her visible morning jogs. Her laptop bag contained specialized encryption software, hidden beneath standard translation programs. The small scar on her left hand, barely visible unless you knew to look for it, came from a knife training accident during advanced combat courses that no translator would ever need. Her colleagues saw Clara as competent but unremarkable. During briefings, she worked with quiet efficiency, her translations precise and culturally appropriate. She never offered opinions on military matters or inserted herself into strategic discussions. When officers made jokes about keeping the pretty translator safe, she smiled politely and continued working, apparently unaffected by the casual condescension. Senior Master Sergeant Rodriguez, who supervised the base's civilian contractors, considered Clara his most reliable asset. She never missed deadlines, never complained about difficult assignments, and never caused the interpersonal drama that sometimes plagued contractor relationships. In his monthly reports to Colonel Webb, Rodriguez consistently rated her performance as outstanding while noting her appropriate deference to military authority. "Kowalski knows her place," Rodriguez had told his staff during a recent evaluation meeting. "She does the job, doesn't get in the way, and doesn't try to be something she's not. That's exactly what we need from civilian support." What Rodriguez and the other supervisors didn't realize was that Clara's compliant behavior was a carefully maintained facade. During her off-duty hours, she studied base operations with the analytical mind of someone trained in strategic assessment. She memorized duty rosters, equipment inventories, and communication protocols not because her job required it, but because situational awareness had been drilled into her, consciousness through years of training that had nothing to do with linguistics. Her Physical appearance contributed significantly to others' underestimation of her capabilities. At 5 feet 4 inches and 125 pounds, Clara looked more like a university student than someone capable of handling serious physical challenges. Her blonde hair and delicate facial features reinforced assumptions about fragility that she never bothered to correct. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. When soldiers made comments about protecting the civilian, she accepted their chivalrous offers with apparent gratitude. The truth was that Clara's small frame concealed muscle definition that came from years of intensive physical conditioning. Her grip strength could crush bones, her reflexes operated at speeds that would surprise combat veterans, and her pain tolerance had been tested under conditions that would break most people. But she kept these capabilities hidden beneath layers of carefully crafted ordinariness. Her linguistic skills, while genuinely impressive, represented only a fraction of her actual training. Clara spoke 6 languages fluently and could function in 4 others with sufficient competency for operational purposes. Her cultural knowledge extended far beyond Romania, to include detailed understanding of regional politics, ethnic tensions, and security threats throughout Eastern Europe and Central Asia. During evening meals in the contractor dining facility, Clara often sat with Marcus Chun, a former Air Force technician who maintained the base's satellite communication systems, and Sarah Williams, a logistics coordinator who had worked contractor positions at various NATO facilities for the past decade. These dinner conversations reinforced her cover as a skilled but unremarkable support person who happened to be very good with languages. "You ever think about trying for a government position?" Chun had asked her recently. "With your language skills, you could probably get something with decent benefits and job security." Clara had smiled and shaken her head. "I like the flexibility of contract work. It lets me travel and see different places without getting tied down to a bureaucracy." It was a perfectly reasonable answer that satisfied casual curiosity, while revealing nothing about her actual background or future plans. Clara had learned long ago that the best way to maintain operational security was to hide in plain sight, to be so thoroughly unremarkable that people's eyes slid past her without registering her as anything worth remembering. But beneath the carefully constructed facade of Clara Kowalski, the competent translator, lay capabilities and experiences that would fundamentally challenge everyone's assumptions about who belonged in their carefully ordered military hierarchy. While other contractors spent their evenings watching movies or video calling family back home, Clara maintained a rigorous training regimen that would have impressed even the base's most dedicated soldiers. Her quarters became a clandestine gymnasium after midnight, when the likelihood of discovery dropped to nearly zero. Using bodyweight exercises and improvised equipment, she maintained the physical conditioning that years of specialized training had built into her compact frame. The metal bed frame served as an anchor point for resistance training. Clara had calculated the exact angles and leverage ratios needed to replicate gym equipment functionality, using paracord and water bottles filled with sand from the base motor pool. Her workout routine cycled through strength, endurance, and flexibility training with the systematic precision of someone who understood that physical degradation could mean the difference between mission success and catastrophic failure. Her most challenging training occurred during weekend leave periods, when most personnel departed for recreational trips to Bucharest or other Romanian cities. Clara used these opportunities to conduct extended field exercises in the mountainous terrain surrounding the base. She developed relationships with local hiking groups, presenting herself as an enthusiastic amateur who enjoyed exploring Romania's natural beauty during her time off. What appeared to be recreational hiking was actually advanced land navigation training. Clara tested her ability to move undetected through hostile terrain, practiced escape and evasion techniques, and maintained her proficiency with improvised survival tools. She'd memorized every trail, cave system, and water source within a 50-kilometer radius of the base, knowledge that extended far beyond what any translator would ever need. Her technical skills received equally intensive development. Clara's laptop contained multiple partitioned hard drives running different operating systems, each configured for specific types of intelligence gathering and analysis. She'd written custom programs for pattern recognition in communication intercepts, social network mapping of potential security threats, and encrypted file management that could withstand forensic examination by military intelligence specialists. Translation work provided perfect cover for accessing classified documents and communication logs. Clara's security clearance, while limited to materials relevant to her linguistic duties, still granted her exposure to operational planning, personnel movements, and strategic assessments. She absorbed this information with the trained memory of someone who understood how seemingly unrelated data points could reveal critical intelligence patterns. Her language skills extended far beyond her official Romanian English certification. During evening hours, Clara maintained proficiency in Russian, Arabic, Farsi, and Mandarin through online courses and encrypted communication with contacts worldwide. She'd built networks of information sources that spanned from academic linguistics conferences to underground resistance movements in countries where freedom of information remained a dangerous concept. Physical surveillance training received constant practice during her daily routine. Clara had identified every security camera on the base, mapped their coverage patterns, and determined optimal routes for avoiding detection during unauthorized movements. She'd timed guard rotations down to individual personality quirks, knowing which sentries were punctual and which tended to extend their cigarette breaks by crucial minutes. That her most sophisticated preparation involved weapons proficiency maintenance. The base armory remained strictly off-limits to civilian contractors, but Clara had identified several locations where training ammunition was stored with less rigorous security protocols. During her maintenance duties, she'd gained access to cleaning supplies that could be repurposed for weapons maintenance, ensuring her skills wouldn't degrade through lack of practice. Combat medical training required creative solutions for skill retention. Clara volunteered for base first aid courses, presenting herself as someone who wanted to be helpful during emergencies. The basic certification gave her legitimate access to medical supplies, while providing opportunities to practice advanced trauma care techniques that she'd learned during much more intensive training programs. Her psychological preparation was perhaps the most challenging aspect of maintaining readiness while living undercover. Clara practiced emotional regulation techniques that allowed her to remain calm under extreme stress, while projecting the appropriate level of civilian anxiety when confronted with military situations. She'd perfected the art of appearing competent, but not threatening, skilled but not suspiciously, so that the mental isolation of maintaining this facade required constant vigilance. Clara couldn't allow herself to form genuine friendships or romantic attachments that might compromise her operational security. Every conversation was carefully managed, every social interaction calculated to reinforce her cover identity, while gathering information about base operations and personnel. During quiet moments, Clara sometimes wondered if her former colleagues would recognize the woman she'd become. The transformation from elite operator to undercover contractor had required abandoning almost everything that had once defined her identity. But the mission parameters had been clear: establish deep cover, maintain readiness, and wait for activation orders that might never come. The waiting was the hardest part. Clara's training had prepared her for direct action, for decisive moments when skill and preparation would determine outcomes. Living as a civilian contractor meant suppressing those instincts while maintaining capabilities that she might never be authorized to use. But she'd accepted this assignment, knowing that the most important battles were often fought by people whose true identities remained forever hidden. The pattern of dismissal began subtly, with small gestures and offhand comments that Clara learned to recognize as systematic undervaluation. During joint briefings, when she provided translations of complex tactical discussions, officers would often pause to ask if she understood the military terminology she was interpreting. The question always came with polite concern, as if they were being helpful rather than questioning her professional competence. Colonel Webb had established the tone during Clara's first week on base. "Miss Kowalski," he'd said after a particularly technical briefing about urban warfare tactics, "I want to make sure you're comfortable with these discussions. Some of the tactical concepts might be unfamiliar to someone with a civilian background. Please don't hesitate to ask for clarification if you encounter terminology that's outside your area of expertise." Clara had responded with appropriate gratitude, thanking him for his consideration while internally noting that she understood the tactical principles being discussed better than most of the junior officers in the room. Her training had covered advanced urban warfare techniques that wouldn't be taught in standard military schools for another 5 years. The dismissive attitude extended beyond language concerns to broader assumptions about her capabilities and interests. During security briefings, officers would automatically gloss over operational details when they reached sections involving physical security measures or defensive protocols. The assumption seemed to be that such information would be too complex or inappropriate for civilian contractors to understand. Major Harrison, the British contingent commander, had been particularly condescending during a briefing about perimeter security upgrades. "The technical aspects aren't really relevant to your work, Ms. Kowalski," he'd said, skipping past detailed explanations of sensor placement and response protocols. "We just need you to be aware that there might be some construction noise during your evening translation sessions." What Harrison didn't realize was that Clara had already identified the security gaps that the new system was designed to address. She'd noted the blind spots in camera coverage, the timing vulnerabilities in patrol rotations, and the communication delays that could be exploited during a coordinated attack. The construction noise would actually reveal the exact locations of motion sensors and infrared detectors, information that she filed away with the systematic thoroughness of someone trained to exploit such intelligence. The dismissal became more pronounced during tactical discussions that touched on combat operations. When Romanian officers described their experiences with insurgent tactics in Afghanistan, the American personnel would visibly shift their attention away from Clara, as if protecting her delicate civilian sensibilities from exposure to violent realities. Senior Master Sergeant Rodriguez had made this attitude explicit during a conversation with other NCOs that Clara had overheard while working late in an adjacent office. "We need to be careful about what we discuss around the contractors," he'd said. "Someone like Kowalski might get the wrong idea about what we actually do here. She seems nice enough, but civilians don't understand that some of our training scenarios involve serious violence." The irony wasn't lost on Clara, who had participated in training scenarios that involved levels of violence that would horrify most military personnel. Her experience with serious violence extended far beyond training into operational environments where survival depended on superior skill with lethal force. But she maintained her facade of appropriate civilian naivety, occasionally asking innocent questions that reinforced their assumptions about her sheltered background. Social exclusion followed professional dismissal with predictable consistency. When off-duty personnel organized informal gatherings, Clara received polite invitations that clearly expected polite declinations. The subtext was obvious. These were military social events where civilian contractors would feel out of place, discussing experiences they couldn't understand or relate to. Lieutenant Cooper, one of the younger American officers, had attempted to be inclusive during a barbecue invitation, but his phrasing revealed the underlying assumptions. "You're welcome to join us, Miss Kowalski, but we'll probably end up talking about boring military stuff that might not interest you." Don't feel obligated to stay if the conversation gets too technical or, too intense for civilian preferences. Clara had thanked him politely while internally noting that intense military conversations rarely approached the psychological pressure of actual combat operations, where real people died based on split-second decisions. The conversations these officers considered too intense for civilian sensibilities would seem like casual social chat compared to debriefings from missions, where failure meant bodies in bags and international incidents that never appeared in official records. The dismissal extended to physical capabilities with almost comical consistency. During base fire drills, male personnel would automatically position themselves between Clara and potential dangers, as if her small stature and civilian status meant she couldn't handle emergency situations independently. When the alarm sounded, soldiers would guide her toward exits with protective gestures that assumed she might panic or become confused under pressure. Captain Thompson had been particularly patronizing during a recent drill, placing his hand on Clara's shoulder and speaking in the slow, careful tone reserved for children or elderly relatives. "Just follow my lead, Miss Kowalski. These drills can be a bit overwhelming if you're not used to military procedures. We'll get you to safety. Don't worry about anything else." Clara had followed his guidance with apparent gratitude while calculating 17 different ways she could have neutralized him and cleared the building more efficiently than the standard evacuation protocol required. Her training had included escape scenarios from buildings under actual enemy fire, situations where evacuation meant fighting through hostile forces rather than walking calmly toward designated exits. The cumulative effect of these dismissive interactions created a psychological environment where Clara's actual capabilities became not just hidden but literally unimaginable to those around her. They had constructed such a complete picture of her limitations that evidence to the contrary would be dismissed as impossible rather than reconsidered. The emergency began as routine maintenance that went catastrophically wrong. At 13:47 hours on what had started as an unremarkable Tuesday afternoon, Specialist Jenkins was conducting standard inspection procedures on the base's primary communication array when he discovered what appeared to be unauthorized modifications to the satellite uplink system. The sophisticated hardware additions weren't in any maintenance log, and their purpose wasn't immediately clear to the base's technical personnel. Colonel Webb ordered an immediate security lockdown while intelligence specialists examined the mysterious equipment. Within 30 minutes, their preliminary analysis revealed a devastating truth. Someone had installed advanced surveillance gear capable of intercepting and recording every classified communication transmitted from the base. Over the past several months, the breach represented a catastrophic intelligence compromise that could expose ongoing NATO operations across Eastern Europe. The security alert escalated to DEFCON 3 as the full scope of the potential damage became clear. Operational plans, troop movements, intelligence assessments, and strategic communications had all been potentially compromised. Worse, the sophisticated nature of the surveillance equipment suggested involvement by hostile intelligence services with substantial technical capabilities and detailed knowledge of NATO communication protocols. Colonel Webb convened an emergency command meeting in the secure briefing room, his face grim as he addressed the assembled officers. "Gentlemen, we have a serious problem. Someone with access to our communication systems has been conducting surveillance operations for an unknown period. We need to assume that every classified transmission from this base has been compromised until we determine the scope of the breach." Major Harrison studied the photographs of the surveillance equipment with growing concern. "Sir, this isn't amateur work. The hardware integration required detailed knowledge of our systems and significant technical expertise. We're looking at a professional intelligence operation, not some opportunistic contractor selling information for money." The investigation immediately focused on identifying personnel with access to the communication facility. The list was surprisingly short: a handful of military communications specialists, 3 civilian technicians, and support staff who performed routine maintenance duties. Security footage revealed that multiple individuals had accessed the facility during recent weeks, but the surveillance equipment could have been installed at any time over the past several months. Clara found herself in an increasingly precarious position as the investigation intensified. Her work as a translator required regular access to the communication center for encrypted file transfers and secure video conferences with various NATO commands. Her security badge records showed numerous entries to the facility, making her a person of interest in the expanding investigation. The base's counterintelligence officer, Captain Morrison, began conducting interviews with all personnel who had accessed the compromised facility. His questioning focused on identifying potential security breaches, unauthorized contacts with foreign nationals, and any suspicious behavior that might indicate espionage activities. Clara knew that her carefully maintained cover story would face scrutiny that could expose inconsistencies in her background. During her scheduled interview, Morrison's questions probed beyond standard security protocol inquiries. "Miss Kowalski, your background check shows extensive travel throughout Eastern Europe before accepting this contract position. Can you explain the nature of those travels and your activities in countries where anti-NATO sentiment remains strong?" Clara provided carefully prepared answers about her linguistic education and cultural research, but she could see Morrison's growing suspicion. Her background, while thoroughly documented, was almost too perfect for someone seeking to establish cover for intelligence operations. The combination of language skills, regional knowledge, and convenient access to classified facilities created a profile that counterintelligence training would flag as potentially problematic. The pressure intensified when analysis of the surveillance equipment revealed that the installation required someone with both technical expertise and detailed knowledge of NATO communication security measures. The suspect profile shifted toward individuals with military or intelligence backgrounds who could have acquired such specialized knowledge through official channels before turning to espionage activities. "We're looking for someone with advanced training who's using civilian contractor status as cover," Morrison told the command staff during an evening briefing that Clara overheard while working late in an adjacent office. The level of sophistication suggests professional intelligence operatives, not amateur opportunists. "Our suspects need to be evaluated based on capability, not just access." Clara realized that her situation was deteriorating rapidly. The investigation was moving toward conclusions that would make her a primary suspect based on her technical capabilities and background. Her careful preparation, intended to maintain readiness for potential mission activation, now appeared to be evidence of espionage activities. The irony was bitter. Her loyalty to NATO interests was absolute, but her operational background made her appear guilty of betraying the very alliance she'd sworn to protect. The crisis deepened when forensic analysis revealed that the surveillance equipment had been installed using tools and techniques that suggested military or intelligence training. The installation showed evidence of advanced tradecraft, including counter-surveillance measures designed to prevent detection during the installation process. Security footage had been subtly altered to obscure the perpetrator's identity, indicating sophisticated knowledge of digital forensics and surveillance countermeasures. Colonel Webb's frustration was evident during the evening command briefing. "Someone on this base has been conducting a professional intelligence operation right under our noses. The technical sophistication and operational security measures indicate advanced training that goes far beyond what civilian contractors should possess. We need to identify this individual before they can escape or destroy additional evidence." Clara knew that her window of opportunity was closing rapidly. The investigation would eventually focus on her with sufficient intensity to discover Inconsistencies in her cover identity. Her operational training provided options for escaping such situations, but using those capabilities would confirm suspicions about her true background while abandoning the deep cover mission she'd spent months establishing. The catalyst crisis had arrived exactly as her training had predicted, not through external enemy action, but through the convergence of circumstances that would force her to choose between maintaining cover and taking direct action to protect mission objectives. As the security investigation entered its third day, Clara found herself facing an impossible choice. The mounting evidence pointed toward a sophisticated espionage operation that threatened to destroy her carefully constructed cover identity. She could continue playing the role of a confused civilian contractor, hoping that her fabricated background would withstand intensive scrutiny, or she could use her actual expertise to help solve the crisis that was tearing the base apart. Decision crystallized during the morning briefing when Colonel Webb announced the expansion of the investigation to include polygraph examinations for all personnel with access to the compromised communication facility. Clara knew that her operational training included techniques for defeating such examinations, but using them would require responses that no civilian translator should possess. The inconsistencies would trigger deeper investigation that could expose her true background. More critically, Clara had spent the previous evening analyzing the surveillance equipment photographs, using skills that had nothing to do with linguistic translation. Her assessment revealed technical details that the base's intelligence specialists had missed, information that could potentially identify the actual perpetrators of the security breach. But sharing this knowledge would raise questions about how a civilian contractor had acquired such specialized expertise. During the morning coffee break, Clara approached Captain Morrison with carefully considered words. "Excuse me, Captain. I know this might sound presumptuous, but I noticed something in those equipment photographs that might be relevant to your investigation." Morrison looked up from his case files with visible irritation. The stress of the investigation had left him operating on minimal sleep and maximum caffeine, with little patience for interruptions from civilian personnel. "Ms. Kowalski, I appreciate your concern, but this is a specialized investigation that requires technical expertise beyond civilian experience. If you've noticed something suspicious about personnel behavior, I'm happy to take a statement." Clara had anticipated this response and prepared her approach accordingly. "Sir, I understand your position, but I have some background in electronics that might be relevant. Before I became a translator, I studied computer engineering and worked with communication systems. I might be able to provide insights that could help identify the equipment's origin or installation methods." The claim stretched her cover story, but remained within plausible bounds. Morrison studied her for a moment, clearly weighing the potential value of additional technical input against the security concerns of involving civilian contractors in sensitive investigations. Clara could see him calculating the risks and benefits while fatigue clouded his judgment. "What kind of background?" Morrison asked, his tone remaining skeptical, but showing the first hint of interest. "We're dealing with sophisticated surveillance equipment that requires advanced technical knowledge to understand properly." Clara chose her words carefully, providing enough detail to establish credibility without revealing the true extent of her capabilities. "I have a master's degree in electronic engineering from Technical University of Munich. My thesis research focused on secure communication protocols and encryption systems. I worked for 2 years with a German technology firm that developed communication security systems for government clients before transitioning to translation work." This explanation had the advantage of being partially true while omitting the classified details about which government clients had used those systems and what kind of training she'd received during that employment. Morrison's expression shifted toward genuine interest as he realized that Clara might possess relevant expertise that the investigation desperately needed. You're saying you might be able to analyze the surveillance equipment from a technical perspective? Morrison asked, leaning forward with the intensity of someone who had been struggling with limited resources. Our technical specialists are good, but they're focused on military communication systems. This equipment appears to be modified civilian technology that might require different analytical approaches. Clara nodded carefully, maintaining the appearance of helpful civilian expertise while internally preparing for the scrutiny that would follow. I believe I could provide useful insights, particularly regarding the integration methods and potential manufacturing sources. The modifications shown in the photograph suggest specific, technical approaches that might indicate the perpetrator's background and training. Morrison was quiet for a moment, clearly torn between security protocol and the potential value of Clara's offer. The investigation had stalled as traditional military intelligence methods proved insufficient for analyzing the sophisticated civilian technology that had been used against them. Fresh perspective from someone with relevant technical background could provide the breakthrough they desperately needed. I need to clear this with Colonel Webb, Morrison said finally. If you're volunteering to assist with technical analysis, we'll need to verify your background and ensure that your involvement doesn't compromise investigation security. Can you provide documentation of your technical education and work experience? Clara had maintained false documentation supporting her cover identity that would withstand standard background verification. The German university records existed in their databases, and the technology firm had been a legitimate business that had employed individuals matching her fabricated background. Her operational handlers had constructed the cover identity with sufficient depth to survive casual investigation while hiding her actual military and intelligence training. Of course, Clara replied. I have all my academic transcripts and employment records in my personnel file. I understand that security concerns require thorough verification before I could be involved in sensitive investigations. Morrison stood up, his decision made. Wait here while I discuss this with the colonel. If he approves your involvement, we'll need you to sign additional security agreements and submit to enhanced background screening. This investigation involves classified material that goes beyond your current clearance level. As Morrison left to consult with Colonel Webb, Clara realized that she had crossed a threshold that would fundamentally change her situation on the base. She could no longer remain an invisible contractor who avoided attention through professional competence. Her offer to help with the investigation would place her at the center of events that could either expose her true identity or provide opportunities to serve mission objectives that extended far beyond linguistic translation. The choice had been made, and there was no path back to the comfortable anonymity she had maintained for the past 6 months. Colonel Webb's office felt smaller than usual as Clara sat across from his desk, facing a tribunal of skeptical faces. Morrison had presented her offer to assist with the investigation, but the reception was far from welcoming. Webb studied her personnel file with the methodical attention of someone looking for reasons to reject rather than accept her involvement. Ms. Kowalski, Webb began, his tone carrying the careful politeness that military officers used when delivering unwelcome news to civilians. Captain Morrison has explained your offer to provide technical assistance with our investigation. While we appreciate your willingness to help, this matter involves classified information and specialized investigative techniques that fall outside civilian contractor purview. Major Harrison nodded in agreement, his expression suggesting that involving civilian contractors in sensitive security matters violated every principle of proper military procedure. Sir, with all due respect to Ms. Kowalski's academic background, we're dealing with a potential espionage operation that requires professional counterintelligence expertise. Civilian involvement could compromise investigative integrity and create additional security risks. Clara had expected this resistance, but found it frustrating nonetheless. Her actual qualifications for analyzing the surveillance equipment exceeded those of anyone on the base, but she couldn't reveal the true extent of her training without destroying her cover identity. She was trapped between the need to maintain operational security and the desire to contribute capabilities that could solve the crisis threatening the base. "Gentlemen," Clara said carefully, "I understand your security concerns, but my technical background might provide insights that could help identify the equipment's origin and installation methods. The modifications shown in the photographs suggest manufacturing techniques and integration approaches that I've encountered in my previous work with communication security systems." Webb leaned back in his chair, his expression showing the polite skepticism that senior officers reserve for civilian contractors who overestimated their own importance. "Miss Kowalski, we have qualified military intelligence specialists analyzing this equipment. They have security clearances, investigative training, and access to technical resources that far exceed what civilian contractors can provide. Your academic credentials, while impressive, don't qualify you for involvement in classified investigations." Morrison shifted uncomfortably, clearly torn between his desperate need for additional expertise and his superior's resistance to civilian involvement. "Sir, our technical analysis has stalled. The equipment uses modified civilian technology that might require different analytical approaches than standard military communication systems. Ms. Kowalski's background in civilian electronic engineering could provide valuable perspective." "Captain," Harrison interjected sharply, "involving civilians in classified investigations creates security vulnerabilities that could compromise the entire operation. We have procedures for requesting additional technical expertise through proper channels. If our current capabilities are insufficient, we should contact NATO intelligence headquarters for specialized assistance." Clara realized that her offer was being rejected not because of her qualifications, but because of fundamental assumptions about civilian capabilities and security protocol. The officers couldn't conceive that a contractor translator might possess relevant expertise, and their adherence to procedure prevented them from considering alternatives to standard investigative approaches. "Sir," Clara pressed, knowing that persistence might seem inappropriate, but recognizing that the investigation's failure could have consequences extending far beyond the base. "The equipment modification suggests specific technical knowledge. That might indicate the perpetrator's background and training. My experience with communication security systems could help identify manufacturing sources and installation techniques that your investigators might not recognize." Webb's patience was clearly wearing thin. His response carried the finality of someone who had made his decision and wouldn't tolerate further discussion. "Miss Kowalski, your enthusiasm is noted, but this investigation requires professional capabilities and security clearances that civilian contractors simply don't possess. Your role here is linguistic translation, not security analysis. I need you to focus on your assigned duties while we handle matters that fall within our area of expertise." The dismissal stung more than Clara had expected. She possessed capabilities that could potentially solve the investigation within hours, but revealing those skills would destroy months of careful cover construction. Her training had prepared her for many challenging situations, but not for the frustration of watching incompetence threaten mission success while being powerless to intervene effectively. "Furthermore," Webb continued, "I'm concerned about your request to involve yourself in matters beyond your assigned responsibilities. Civilian contractors who show excessive interest in military operations and classified information raise red flags that require additional scrutiny. Your eagerness to participate in this investigation could be interpreted as suspicious behavior that warrants further examination." Clara felt a chill of recognition as Webb's words revealed the dangerous turn her situation was taking. Her offer to help was being reframed as potential evidence of guilty involvement in the security breach. The logical trap was elegant in its simplicity. Innocent contractors would show appropriate concern, but wouldn't possess the technical knowledge or investigative interest that she had. Demonstrated. Morrison looked uncomfortable as he realized that his request for Clara's assistance had potentially made her a suspect rather than a resource. "Sir, I don't believe Miss Kowalski's offer indicates suspicious motives. She's simply trying to be helpful during a crisis situation that affects everyone on the base." "Perhaps," Webb replied, his tone suggesting doubt rather than agreement. "But excessive interest in classified investigations from civilian personnel requires careful evaluation. Miss Kowalski, I want you to understand that your involvement in this matter is concluded. Return to your regular duties and avoid any further contact with investigation personnel or materials. Any violation of this directive will result in immediate termination of your contract and potential security charges." Harrison added his own warning, apparently believing that civilian contractors needed explicit guidance about appropriate behavior during security crises. "Miss Kowalski, I want to be absolutely clear about expectations. Your access to classified information is limited to materials directly relevant to your translation duties. Any attempt to gather information about this investigation through unofficial channels will be considered a serious security violation." Clara nodded with appropriate civilian deference while internally noting the irony of the situation. Her loyalty to NATO interests was absolute, but her offer to help protect those interests was being treated as potential evidence of betrayal. The investigation would likely fail without the expertise she could provide, but revealing that expertise would confirm suspicions about her true background and destroy her operational effectiveness. As she left Webb's office, Clara realized that her situation had become untenable. She could no longer maintain the pretense of civilian innocence while watching the investigation stumble toward failure. The security breach threatened interests that extended far beyond the base, and her training demanded action even if that action exposed her true identity. The time for hiding behind translation duties was rapidly coming to an end. That evening, Clara sat in her quarters staring at the encrypted communication device hidden behind her wardrobe's false back panel. The device could connect her to handlers who would provide extraction and new identity documents within 72 hours, ending her deep cover mission but preserving her operational security. Alternatively, she could use her actual capabilities to solve the investigation, knowing that success would inevitably expose her true background and terminate her usefulness as a covert asset. The decision had been weighing on her mind since leaving Webb's office that afternoon. Her dismissal from the investigation hadn't surprised her, but the implicit accusation of suspicious behavior had created a dangerous dynamic that could only escalate. Every day the investigation continued without resolution increased the likelihood that desperate investigators would focus on convenient suspects rather than actual perpetrators. Clara understood the mathematics of her situation with cold clarity. Morrison's counterintelligence training would eventually lead him to profile analysis that identified her as a person of interest based on technical knowledge, access opportunities, and behavioral patterns. Her offer to assist with the investigation, intended to demonstrate loyalty and expertise, would be reinterpreted as evidence of guilty knowledge about the surveillance equipment's installation and operation. The base communication logs showed that NATO headquarters was demanding rapid resolution of the security breach. Each day of delay increased pressure on local command to produce results, creating incentives for investigators to construct cases against available suspects rather than continuing difficult searches for actual perpetrators. Clara's background made her an attractive target for officials who needed to demonstrate investigative progress to increasingly impatient superiors. Her training had covered these psychological dynamics extensively. Counterintelligence investigations under pressure often focused on individuals who stood out from normal patterns, regardless of whether that deviation indicated guilt or simply unusual backgrounds. Clara's combination of technical knowledge, linguistic skills, and access to classified facilities created a profile that investigators would find compelling even without direct evidence of wrongdoing. The decision crystallized when she intercepted communications indicating that Morrison planned to request enhanced surveillance of her activities starting the following morning. Security protocols would monitor her movements, communications, and contacts while background investigators conducted deeper examination of her cover identity. Clara knew that her fabricated documentation would withstand casual scrutiny, but might not survive the intensive investigation that desperate officials were preparing to conduct. She had perhaps 12 hours before enhanced surveillance would begin limiting her freedom of movement. After that point, any unauthorized activities would be immediately detected and interpreted as evidence of guilt. Her window for taking independent action was closing rapidly, and the consequences of inaction could extend far beyond her personal situation. Clara retrieved the surveillance equipment photographs from her translation files, where she had legitimately accessed them during routine document processing. Her analysis had identified specific technical details that military investigators had missed, information that could potentially lead to the actual perpetrators of the security breach. But providing this analysis through official channels would require explanations about her expertise. That would inevitably expose her true background. The alternative was to conduct her own investigation, using capabilities that no civilian contractor should possess. Clara could identify the surveillance equipment's origin, trace its installation timeline, and potentially determine the perpetrator's identity within 24 hours. But doing so would require techniques and resources that would make her true training obvious to anyone who examined her methods. Her operational directive had been clear: maintain deep cover at all costs while gathering intelligence about regional security threats. The surveillance equipment installation represented exactly the kind of threat she had been positioned to detect and analyze. But her mission parameters hadn't anticipated a situation where protecting her cover identity would prevent her from addressing critical threats to NATO security interests. Clara opened her laptop and began drafting 2 different documents. The first was a detailed technical analysis of the surveillance equipment that identified its likely origin, installation methods, and operational capabilities. The analysis demonstrated expertise that no civilian contractor should possess, but provided information that could solve the investigation within hours. The second document was a personal message to her operational handlers, explaining her decision to abandon deep cover in favor of direct action to protect mission objectives. She explained the security breach's potential impact on NATO operations and her assessment that maintaining cover was less important than preventing the compromise of ongoing intelligence operations throughout Eastern Europe. The decision felt inevitable once she acknowledged the stakes involved. Her deep cover mission had been designed to provide intelligence about long-term threats to NATO interests in the region. The immediate threat represented by the surveillance equipment compromise outweighed the strategic value of maintaining her hidden position for potential future missions. Clara sealed both documents in encrypted files that could be transmitted through secure channels or delivered physically depending on circumstances. Her choice was made, but she would implement it carefully to maximize the chance of success while minimizing additional security risks to ongoing NATO operations. At 0300 hours, she changed into dark clothing suitable for night operations and gathered equipment that she had carefully accumulated over the past 6 months. The gear included technical tools for electronic surveillance, communication devices for secure contact with external resources, and personal protection items that would help her survive the consequences of her decision to abandon cover and take direct action. Clara looked around her quarters one final time, knowing that she would never return as the mild-mannered translator who had lived there for the past 6 months. Her next actions would irrevocably expose her true identity and end her usefulness as a covert asset. But some missions required sacrificing long-term strategic Advantages to address immediate critical threats. She had been trained to make exactly these kinds of decisions under pressure. The time for hiding behind civilian pretense was over. Clara slipped out of her quarters at 0330 hours, moving through the base with the fluid confidence of someone who had memorized every patrol route and security camera angle during months of careful observation. The guard rotations she had studied revealed a predictable gap in coverage between buildings 7 and 9, a 15-minute window that occurred during shift changes when outgoing sentries assumed their replacements had already taken position. Her first objective was the communication facility where the surveillance equipment had been discovered. Official investigators had examined the hardware but missed crucial details that Clara's specialized training had identified from the photographs. She needed physical access to the installation site to confirm her analysis and gather evidence that would identify the actual perpetrators of the security breach. The facility's security system had been upgraded following the discovery of unauthorized surveillance equipment, but Clara had anticipated these changes during her earlier reconnaissance. The new measures focused on preventing future intrusions rather than detecting individuals who already possessed legitimate access credentials. Her contractor identification badge still granted entry to areas where her translation duties required routine access. Inside the communication center, Clara worked with practiced efficiency to examine the surveillance equipment installation site. Her technical analysis revealed details that military investigators had overlooked due to their focus on the equipment's operational capabilities rather than installation methodology. The mounting brackets showed specific tool marks that indicated professional installation techniques, but more importantly, they revealed timeline information that contradicted the investigation's current assumptions. Clara's examination identified residue from specialized solvents used in the installation process. The chemical signature was distinctive enough to trace to specific manufacturers who supplied such materials to a limited customer base. More critically, the installation showed evidence of multiple modification phases conducted over several weeks, indicating a systematic operation rather than a single intrusion event. Her analysis also revealed that the surveillance equipment had been designed to appear more sophisticated than its actual capabilities warranted. The visible components suggested advanced interception abilities, but closer examination showed that much of the hardware was non-functional decoration intended to create the impression of a major intelligence breach. The actual surveillance capabilities were limited to basic communication monitoring that would have provided minimal useful intelligence. This discovery fundamentally changed Clara's understanding of the security breach. Rather than a professional espionage operation conducted by hostile intelligence services, the evidence suggested a deception operation designed to create the appearance of a major security compromise. Someone wanted NATO investigators to believe they had suffered a devastating intelligence breach when the actual damage was relatively minimal. Clara documented her findings using equipment that she had acquired through channels that had nothing to do with civilian contracting. Her camera could capture detail that would survive forensic analysis, while her chemical detection kit could identify trace evidence that standard military investigators would miss. The documentation package she assembled would provide definitive proof of her conclusions, but it would also demonstrate capabilities that no translator should possess. Her next objective required accessing personnel records to identify individuals with the technical knowledge and facility access necessary to conduct the deception operation. The base personnel database contained detailed information about security clearances, facility access logs, and background investigations that could reveal potential suspects. But accessing this information would require penetrating security systems far beyond her authorized access level. Clara's training included advanced computer intrusion techniques that remained classified even within elite military units. She could access the personnel database without detection, but using these capabilities would leave digital fingerprints that sophisticated forensic analysis could eventually trace back to her. The decision to proceed would irrevocably expose her technical training while providing information crucial to solving the investigation. She worked through the personnel database with systematic thoroughness, analyzing access logs and background information for all individuals who could have installed the surveillance equipment. Her search parameters included technical expertise, facility access, and behavioral patterns that might indicate involvement in deception operations. The analysis eliminated most potential suspects, but identified 3 individuals whose profiles warranted deeper investigation. The most promising suspect was a civilian contractor named Marcus Chen, whose background included electronics expertise and whose access logs showed suspicious patterns around the time frame when the surveillance equipment had been installed. But Chen's psychological profile didn't match someone capable of conducting sophisticated deception operations, and his motivation for risking criminal charges remained unclear. Clara's investigation revealed a more complex picture when she examined Chen's financial records and personal communications. His recent behavior suggested someone under external pressure rather than someone conducting voluntary espionage activities. The pattern indicated coercion rather than ideological motivation, suggesting that Chen might be a victim rather than a willing participant in the deception operation. Her analysis identified external contacts who had been pressuring Chen through personal and financial leverage. The communication patterns revealed a sophisticated manipulation campaign designed to force Chen's cooperation with the surveillance equipment installation while ensuring that he would become the primary suspect if the operation was discovered. Chen had been selected as an ideal patsy whose background would satisfy investigators looking for someone to blame. Clara realized that the deception operation was even more sophisticated than she had initially assessed. The surveillance equipment installation was designed not just to create the appearance of an intelligence breach, but to focus suspicion on a convenient scapegoat whose prosecution would close the investigation without exposing the actual perpetrators. Chen's arrest would satisfy NATO headquarters' demand for accountability while protecting the real architects of the operation. Her investigation had identified the actual perpetrators, but revealing this information would require explaining how she had acquired technical evidence and accessed classified databases beyond her authorization level. Clara faced the same dilemma that had driven her initial decision to abandon deep cover. She possessed crucial information that could prevent a serious injustice, but using that information would expose capabilities that would end her operational effectiveness. As dawn approached, Clara prepared her final documentation package, while considering her limited options for revealing the truth without completely compromising her cover identity. The evidence she had gathered would exonerate Chen and identify the actual perpetrators, but delivery methods remained problematic for someone supposedly limited to translation duties. The investigation would resume in a few hours with Chen as the primary suspect. Clara had perhaps 6 hours to find a way to deliver her evidence before an innocent man was arrested for crimes he had been manipulated into committing. At 8 hours, Clara watched from her office window as security personnel escorted Marcus Chen toward the detention facility. His shoulders were slumped in defeat, his face showing the hollow expression of someone who knew that his protestations of innocence would be dismissed as the desperate lies of a caught spy. Morrison's investigation had followed predictable patterns, constructing a case against the most convenient suspect rather than pursuing the more complex truth that Clara's unauthorized investigation had revealed. She had spent the early morning hours preparing a comprehensive evidence package that would exonerate Chen while identifying the actual perpetrators of the deception operation. But delivering this information posed challenges that went beyond simple communication difficulties. Clara's evidence had been gathered using techniques and resources that would immediately expose her true background to anyone who examined her methodology. The morning briefing confirmed her worst fears about the investigation's direction. Colonel Webb announced Chun's arrest with the satisfaction of someone who could finally report progress to increasingly impatient NATO headquarters. The case against Chun appeared solid based on circumstantial evidence and his technical capabilities, even though the actual proof of his guilt remained thin and largely speculative. Mr. Chun has been taken into custody, pending formal charges of espionage and security violations, Webb announced to the assembled personnel. His access to communication, facilities, and technical expertise provided the opportunity and capability for installing the surveillance equipment. We expect formal prosecution proceedings to begin within 72 hours. Clara realized that her window for intervention was closing rapidly. Once formal charges were filed, Chun's fate would be determined by legal proceedings that would focus on available evidence rather than investigative thoroughness. Her documentation could prevent this injustice, but revealing it would require capabilities that would make her own background a subject of intense scrutiny. During the coffee break, following the briefing, Clara approached Morrison with carefully prepared words. "Captain, I know this might be presumptuous, but I have some concerns about the Chun investigation that I'd like to discuss privately." Morrison's expression shifted to barely concealed irritation. His exhaustion from the investigation had been compounded by pressure from senior command to produce results quickly. The last thing he wanted was interference from civilian contractors who didn't understand the complexities of counterintelligence work. "Miss Kowalski, we've been through this. Your role here doesn't include involvement in security investigations." Mr. Chun's arrest was based on thorough analysis of available evidence and his documented access to the compromised facilities. "I don't have time for speculation from personnel who lack investigative training." Clara had anticipated this resistance but knew that her next words would irrevocably change her situation on the base. "Sir, I have evidence that suggests Mr. Chun was manipulated into installing the surveillance equipment by external actors who used personal and financial pressure to ensure his cooperation. The equipment installation was designed to create the appearance of a major intelligence breach, while ensuring that Chun would become the primary suspect." Morrison stopped walking and turned to face her with an expression that mixed surprise with professional skepticism. "Miss Kowalski, those are serious allegations that would require substantial evidence to support. How exactly would a civilian translator acquire information about external manipulation and coercion that trained investigators missed?" The moment of truth had arrived exactly as Clara's training had predicted it would, not through gradual revelation, but through circumstances that forced immediate choice between maintaining cover and taking action to prevent serious injustice. Her response would determine not only Chun's fate, but her own future as a covert operative. "Captain, I need to show you something that will explain how I acquired this information," Clara said, her voice steady despite the magnitude of what she was about to reveal. "But first, I need your assurance that you'll examine the evidence objectively rather than dismissing it based on assumptions about my background and capabilities." Morrison studied her face with the intensity of someone trained to read deception and hidden motives. Something in Clara's tone had triggered his professional instincts, suggesting that she possessed information more significant than civilian speculation about investigative procedures. "What kind of evidence?" Morrison asked, his skepticism tempered by genuine curiosity about what the translator believed she had discovered. "Miss Kowalski, if you have information relevant to this investigation, you have an obligation to share it regardless of how you acquired it." Clara knew that her next words would end her deep cover mission, but might prevent an innocent man from spending decades in prison for crimes he had been manipulated into committing. "Sir, I have technical analysis of the surveillance equipment that identifies its actual capabilities and installation timeline. I also have communication intercepts and financial records that document the external pressure used to coerce Chun's cooperation." "How did you acquire technical analysis and communication intercepts?" Morrison demanded, his voice carrying the sharp edge of someone who had just realized that his assumptions about civilian contractor capabilities might be fundamentally wrong. Ms. Kowalski, accessing classified information beyond your authorization level is a federal crime that could result in decades of imprisonment. Clara reached into her jacket pocket and withdrew a sealed envelope containing documentation that would forever change how everyone on the base viewed her capabilities and background. Captain, before I show you this evidence, I need you to understand that my actual qualifications for analyzing security threats extend significantly beyond linguistic translation. Morrison's expression shifted from irritation to intense focus as he realized that the mild-mannered translator was about to reveal information that could fundamentally alter his understanding of the investigation. Miss Kowalski, what exactly are you telling me about your background? Clara handed him the envelope with steady hands, despite knowing that its contents would end her usefulness as a covert asset while potentially saving an innocent man's life. Sir, I'm telling you that Marcus Chen is innocent, and I have the evidence to prove it. Morrison opened the envelope with the careful attention of someone who understood that its contents might fundamentally alter his investigation. The first document was a technical analysis of the surveillance equipment that demonstrated capabilities far beyond what any civilian contractor should possess. Clara's examination had identified manufacturing details, installation timelines, and operational limitations that military investigators had completely missed. This analysis shows professional-grade forensic expertise, Morrison said, his voice carrying a mixture of amazement and growing suspicion. Miss Kowalski, this level of technical detail requires specialized training and equipment that civilians don't typically access. How did you conduct this examination without authorization? Clara knew that each revelation would make her background more questionable while simultaneously proving Chen's innocence. Captain, the surveillance equipment was designed to appear more sophisticated than its actual capabilities. Someone wanted you to believe this was a major intelligence breach when it was actually a deception operation, designed to focus suspicion on a convenient scapegoat. The second document contained communication intercepts that showed external actors pressuring Chen through personal and financial leverage. Morrison studied the intercepted messages with growing recognition that his investigation had focused on a victim rather than a perpetrator. The psychological manipulation revealed in the communications showed sophisticated understanding of human vulnerabilities and coercion techniques. These intercepts demonstrate advanced signals intelligence capabilities, Morrison observed, his tone shifting from suspicion to professional assessment. Miss Kowalski, acquiring this information would require access to classified monitoring systems and technical expertise that extends far beyond linguistic translation. I need you to explain exactly who you are and how you obtained this intelligence. Clara had reached the point where maintaining any pretense of civilian contractor identity would be impossible. Her evidence package had achieved its intended purpose of proving Chen's innocence, but the methodology she had used could only be explained by revealing training that would fundamentally change how everyone viewed her presence on the base. Captain, before I explain my background, I need you to understand that Marcus Chen was selected as a target because his profile made him an ideal suspect for conventional investigation approaches. The actual perpetrators calculated that you would focus on his technical capabilities and facility access, rather than examining the broader intelligence picture. Morrison set down the documents and studied Clara with the intense focus of someone reassessing fundamental assumptions about a familiar situation. Ms. Kowalski, these documents demonstrate capabilities that suggest military or intelligence training far beyond anything in your official background. I need you to provide a complete explanation of your actual qualifications and how you acquired this information. The moment Clara had been trained to avoid for months had finally arrived through circumstances that made revelation necessary to prevent serious injustice. Captain, My actual background includes training and experience that qualified me to recognize the deception operation that your investigation missed. But proving Chun's innocence required using capabilities that would expose my true identity. Morrison's expression shifted to the careful neutrality that investigators used when dealing with potential security violations. Ms. Kowalski, I'm going to need you to provide complete documentation of your actual background and explain why you've been operating under false pretenses on a NATO military installation. This situation has implications that extend far beyond the Chun investigation. Clara reached into her jacket and withdrew a second envelope containing documentation that would answer Morrison's questions while creating new complications for her. Operational status. Sir, my actual qualifications include specialized training in counterintelligence operations and technical analysis. I've been operating under deep cover to gather intelligence about regional security threats. The revelation hit Morrison like a physical blow as he realized that his assumptions about civilian contractor capabilities had been fundamentally wrong. You're telling me that you're an intelligence operative who's been conducting covert operations while posing as a translator. Ms. Kowalski, if that's true, then your presence here raises questions about jurisdictional authority and operational coordination that I'm not qualified to address. Clara knew that her revelation would trigger security protocols that would fundamentally change her situation while potentially saving Chun from prosecution for crimes he had been manipulated into committing. Captain, my operational directive was to maintain deep cover while gathering intelligence about threats to NATO interests. The surveillance equipment installation represented exactly the kind of threat I was positioned to detect and analyze. Morrison studied the documentation with growing understanding of how his investigation had been manipulated by external actors who understood conventional investigative approaches well enough to exploit them. This evidence shows that Chun was specifically selected and coerced because his background would satisfy investigators looking for someone to blame. We've been investigating the victim while the actual perpetrators remained hidden. The irony wasn't lost on Clara that her success in proving Chun's innocence had been achieved by revealing capabilities that would make her own presence on the base a subject of intense scrutiny. Sir, the deception operation was designed to create exactly the kind of investigation you conducted. The perpetrators calculated that conventional approaches would focus on available suspects rather than examining the broader intelligence picture. Morrison closed the evidence folder and looked at Clara with the expression of someone who had just realized that his entire understanding of a familiar situation had been wrong. Ms. Kowalski, or whatever your actual name is, this evidence clearly exonerates Chun while raising serious questions about operational security and jurisdictional authority. I need to contact NATO intelligence headquarters immediately to report this development. Clara nodded, knowing that her decision to save an innocent man would trigger consequences that would end her deep cover mission while potentially exposing ongoing intelligence operations throughout the region. Captain, I understand that revealing this information creates complications for ongoing operations, but preventing the prosecution of an innocent man was worth the operational cost. As Morrison prepared to contact his superiors, Clara realized that her months of careful cover construction were about to be destroyed by her success in proving what trained investigators had missed. The truth would save Chun's life, but would irrevocably change her own operational status in ways that remained to be determined. 3 weeks after the revelation that had transformed Clara from overlooked translator to exposed special operations officer, Forward Operating Base Serpent operated with a fundamentally different understanding of capabilities and assumptions that had previously governed personnel interactions. The morning briefings now included security protocols that acknowledged the possibility that ordinary-appearing civilian contractors might possess extraordinary capabilities that could affect mission outcomes. Colonel Webb had been forced to confront The reality that his dismissive attitude toward civilian contractor expertise had nearly resulted in the prosecution of an innocent man while allowing actual security threats to remain undetected. His morning address to assembled personnel reflected lessons learned from Clara's revelation that conventional assumptions about personnel capabilities could be dangerously wrong. "Ladies and gentlemen," Webb announced during the daily briefing, "recent events have demonstrated that our operational effectiveness depends on recognizing and utilizing all available capabilities, regardless of their source or apparent limitations. We must evaluate personnel based on actual qualifications, rather than assumptions about background or appearance." Major Harrison had undergone perhaps the most significant perspective change, having been forced to acknowledge that his resistance to civilian contractor involvement in security matters had been based on prejudices rather than rational assessment of capabilities. His new protocols emphasized capability evaluation over procedural restrictions when dealing with potential security threats. Marcus Chun had returned to his communication systems duties, but with a fundamentally altered understanding of the people around him and the complexity of threats that could affect base operations. His experience as the target of a sophisticated deception operation had taught him to appreciate the value of questioning conventional assumptions about guilt and innocence. "I keep thinking about how close I came to spending decades in prison for something I was manipulated into doing," Chun told Clara during one of their conversations in the contractor dining facility. "If you hadn't been willing to sacrifice your mission to save me, I'd be facing espionage charges based on evidence that seemed convincing, but was fundamentally wrong." Clara's new status on the base remained complicated by operational security requirements that prevented complete disclosure of her actual background and training. She could no longer maintain the pretense of being a civilian translator, but her true identity as a Delta Force operator remained classified information that only select personnel were authorized to know. Captain Morrison had been promoted and reassigned to NATO intelligence headquarters, where his experience with Clara's investigation would contribute to improved protocols for recognizing and utilizing unconventional intelligence resources. His final report had emphasized the importance of capability assessment over assumption when dealing with personnel who might possess relevant expertise. The base's training programs had been modified to include scenarios that challenged conventional assumptions about personnel capabilities and threat assessment. New protocols emphasized the importance of considering non-obvious sources of expertise when dealing with complex security challenges that might require specialized knowledge or skills. Clara's reassignment to overt special operations duties had been handled through channels that preserved operational security while acknowledging her demonstrated capabilities. Her new role involved training other personnel in recognizing and countering deception operations that exploited conventional investigative assumptions and procedural limitations. During her final week at the base before reassignment, Clara conducted briefings for intelligence personnel about the techniques she had used to identify the actual perpetrators of the surveillance equipment installation. Her presentations emphasized the importance of looking beyond obvious suspects when dealing with sophisticated deception operations. The perpetrators succeeded because they understood how conventional investigations would proceed. Clara explained to the assembled intelligence specialists. They selected Chun as a target because his background would satisfy investigators looking for someone to blame, while their actual operation remained hidden behind assumptions about civilian contractor limitations. The ripple effects of Clara's revelation extended beyond the base to influence NATO intelligence protocols throughout Eastern Europe. Her success in detecting and countering a sophisticated deception operation had provided lessons about recognizing unconventional threats and utilizing non-obvious capabilities that would improve security effectiveness across multiple installations. Senior Master Sergeant Rodriguez, who had supervised civilian contractors including Clara, had undergone mandatory retraining about capability assessment and threat recognition. His new approach emphasized getting to know contractor personnel well enough to identify potential capabilities that might be relevant to base security and operations. I spent 6 months working with someone whose actual qualifications could have solved security problems that I didn't even know we had, Rodriguez admitted during a supervisory meeting. Her willingness to remain invisible and helpful masked capabilities that could have been valuable for ongoing operations if I'd been smart enough to recognize them. Clara's final morning at the base began with the same 0500 hours routine that had characterized her months as a translator, but now her early exercise was acknowledged as the professional training maintenance that it had always been. Personnel who encountered her during morning runs understood that they were observing someone whose physical conditioning served operational purposes rather than recreational fitness. As she prepared for departure, Clara reflected on the lessons that her experience had provided about the importance of looking beyond surface appearances when assessing capabilities and threats. Her success in preventing an injustice had required sacrificing a carefully constructed cover identity, but the intelligence value and personnel protection achieved had justified the cover-justified operational cost. The base continued its mission with improved understanding of the complexity that could lie beneath ordinary appearances. Clara's revelation had challenged fundamental assumptions about who possessed relevant capabilities and how those capabilities should be recognized and utilized. When circumstances required expertise that extended beyond conventional qualifications, her legacy at Forward Operating Base Serpent would be measured not just by the investigation she had solved or the innocent man she had saved, but by the permanent change in perspective about recognizing and respecting capabilities that might be hidden beneath assumptions about limitations and roles. The small translator who had once been dismissed for her size and civilian status had proven that strength came in many forms, and that the most dangerous mistake was underestimating people based on appearances rather than actual capabilities. Sometimes the most powerful person in the room was the one everyone had learned to overlook. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.